And we've got one more question here. This is from Dave. Dave is my 68-year-old golfer. Sorry, Dave, made you a little bit younger. Hey guys, I have a question about stretching and injury. I'm 68 and I love to play golf, but I don't stretch before, during, or after I play. And the guys give me a bad time. They say I'm setting myself up for an injury. Does stretching really help prevent injuries? I don't want to waste my time if it doesn't. Thanks for your answer, Dave. All right. Once again, if Dave was watching, I would ask for some more information from Dave in terms of, does he have a history of any type of injury to his shoulders or to his back or anything like that? But once again, talking in global concepts, if you are trying to stretch before your activity to prevent injury, the science doesn't bear that to be true. So if you are static stretching before you have an event, thinking that, okay, I'm going to hopefully prevent pulling a hamstring when I play soccer or basketball or something like that, the literature doesn't bear that to hold true. So then people say, well, then, okay, well, then I'm not going to stretch before I play. Fair enough. However, the literature also says, though, that if you can if you have a dynamic stretch to that area first, because what we're really trying to do is ramp up that motor system as well, too, our neuromuscular system.
Activation.
Correct. So if you ever lift weights and you do the first set, and then oftentimes the second set is a little bit easier than the first set, and you're like, wait a minute, shouldn't I be a little tired? Why is my second set easier?
Yeah.
Because you've kind of woken up the nervous system a little bit. Right. You've recruited those motor neurons a little bit better, and the body goes, you're doing a bench press. Okay. Now, sorry about that, Ed. I wasn't with you the first time because you didn't warm up and you went right into it. And so, like dynamic stretch, for example, like a static stretch might be, if I was just, let's say I'm playing tennis or pickleball or something, and a static stretch might be if I'm just putting my arm through here and I'm just getting a little bit of anterior shoulder pectoralis stretch, maybe for 30-second static stretch. Now, I really don't recommend static stretching before you have to play your event. I would rather have you do a dynamic stretch. And the reason is because if you were to test my strength of my arm, and then if you were to have me do a 30-second static stretch and then test the absolute power of my arm again, it would actually go down a little bit. So you think about that. So if you do a lot of leg stretching before your soccer game, you're actually going to lose a little bit of strength, a little bit of power and explosiveness. So you're not gaining any edge and injury. Plus, you're actually making yourself a little bit slower.
Yeah. So and think about like sprinters and people who hurdle. You're not going to stretch your hamstrings before you go hurdling. No, because you want that spring. You want it kind of, and understandably, there is that place where you have to do a dynamic stretch and you have to train for that so that hamstring is flexible enough during that activity. It's not like you can just go like, I'm going to go do hurdles and not stretch. No, that's not something to do. But the dynamic stretching prepares you prepares the muscles for the activity that you're going to be doing.
Yeah. So like, for example, like I was saying earlier, so rather than holding a static stretch before I play tennis or pickleball, I might just do some things where I'm just gently going through the motions that I would want my arm to do in the course of the game. So if you had a lower extremity sport, it might be something where you are just working on some hip circles to try to loosen up that hip. You might be grabbing onto something and just doing some light kicks just to kind of loosen that up. And as things loosen up, you would start to go a little bit further and further with it. And the idea is, it's almost like in basketball when you just go through a really light layup line first, so taking a nice jog, getting a little bead of sweat going, getting your body primed for your activity, and then taking your particular sport, breaking it down into its component pieces, and then slowly working on it. So if you were doing some rotational stuff, if you were golfing, start off with a slow amplitude, and then slowly get it to be a little bit bigger. And that would be a better dynamic warm-up in the moment. So the next question becomes like, well, why should I even bother stretching then? Why does that make such a big deal? Well, it depends, because that was in the moment before Dave golfed. Now, let's say Dave has a history, like we talked about, of an old shoulder injury or something. So every time he pulls back through here, he gets a little tightness through this shoulder. And so after he's done playing is when we need to address some of those areas. So if you have tightness in an area that's limiting your normal range of motion, That's where the stretching and foam rolling comes into play. And that's where you want to start holding your static stretches like we addressed with Toby. So you might, something that, if you can hold it for a 30-second count, and if it starts to loosen up, you're good. But if it doesn't, now we know that we got to hold it a little bit longer.
And with prolonged stretching, you want your body to actually be a little bit cool.
With prolonged stretching?
Prolonged for that creep effect, for ligaments, kind of to get into that joint capsule. You want to have a cool body, because then for sure you're not going to be moving into that contractile tissue, for one thing. But think about it this way. So Dave, one thing that he could do is do prolonged stretching and get down into almost like a child's pose, where he's stretching the back of his arm or his back or whatever, and holding that 3 to 5 minutes, and doing that early in the morning. Or you might do that before you go to bed when your body's cool. When it's not going to be like, you can do it before you play golf, right? You could do it before you played golf if you wanted to get the creep effect. But like Ed said, that's not really, it's not supporting, there's no evidence supporting that that's going to be helpful. So what I would do and recommend is prolonged stretching like early in the morning for a long-term effect. We're just thinking like, we're thinking about making long-term changes in our body, not just for my golf game.
It's really important. I mean, this is what this whole channel is about. This is what our practice is about. Elizabeth and I both PTs for 27, 28 years now. It's all about educating, because we don't realize how much of this we can take care of, that the tools are right here within us.
Yeah.
It's just a question of disseminating the knowledge. And what we try to do is connect the dots. There's nothing that you can't learn on the internet right now. The challenge that I have is the patient will come in and say, well, I read this and it said this, and I read this and it said this. So I stopped doing that. But then this said I should do that. And I'm all confused. And so it's nice when you can have someone that can connect the dots for you. And that's really what we try to do.
Yeah.
So to kind of summarize this umbrella of stretching, so to speak, I think stretching is valuable for me because it feels really good.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily stretch to prevent injury before I play basketball. I'll do my dynamic warm-ups. I'll get on the elliptical machine. I got to get my core worked up. I got to get my core temperature working. So I got a little bead of sweat going first. Then I'll go into a dynamic warm-up, which is a component of whatever I'm doing.
Yeah.
If I'm beating my buddy Jeff in tennis, sorry, Jeff. Jeff usually beats me. But if I'm trying to beat him in tennis, then I will do a tennis-specific dynamic warm-up, because that's different than what it would look like for basketball. After I'm warmed up, maybe I jog up and down the court, do some grapevine, something like that. Yeah. And then afterwards, at the end of the day, or like Elizabeth said, early in the morning, that's when I start addressing my chronic areas of tightness.
Yeah.
Like because of my scoliosis, I actually have a chronic tightness in my right hip and my low back. So I know that that's when I have to hold my prolonged stretching. I'll foam roll my hip, try to trigger point my back a little bit, and then I'll hold that for a prolonged stretch. So when someone says stretching doesn't work, your next question should be, well, what type of stretching are you doing?
It's your intention. It's like, what is your intention? With Dave, I would say with Dave, really for any of us who are over like 20, that would be most of us, right? Stretching is for lifestyle. Stretching is so that we can carry out the things we want to do in our life, right? So if you want to do prolonged stretching, it's like, that's to make long-term gains, not to get you through one golf game, right? So think about what your intention is in your body. Are you trying to make long-term gains? And make sure, when you have your body warmed up, you're going to be affecting that contractile tissue. And when you are cool, when your body's cool, you're going to have more of a likelihood of affecting that fascia or the ligaments or the joint capsules.
And I'll say one more thing too, once again, for the more mature population, I guess we are, that our muscle fibers actually change. The elastin, which is in the muscle, which is make the muscles elastic, actually starts to change. So when you feel like, wait a minute, I'm getting stiffer. Is that my imagination?
no.
Unfortunately, it's not. We are getting stiffer. So if I'm able to turn my head this far, and if I don't work on actively stretching, pretty
Mhm.
soon I'm only going to get about 60 or 70% of that range of
Yeah.
motion,
Mhm.
not because anything is wrong, but just because the tissue is changing.
Mhm.
So I advocate a stretching routine for my older clients to, first of all, improve range of motion that might be a little inhibited, but also to, hey, you like the fact that you can hang from a bar? Great. Well, then you better stretch out your shoulder, because if you don't, you jump on that bar 5 years from now and you're going to pull something in that shoulder,
Yeah.
because the contractile tissue will have kind of tightened up, so to speak, as part of the aging process again.
Yeah.
But it doesn't
Yep.
have to be that way. But
No.
if you have that knowledge, then you're like, I better jump on this thing now. And if you're
Yeah.
younger, like our kids, sorry, Logan, Owen, Hope, but we're always harping on them. I mean, they're, teenagers and they're in
Yeah.
their 20s. But you really have to learn to take care of yourself now and just understand. And I always
Yeah.
tell them, biology before pharmacology. So if you have tight,
Mhm.
achy muscles, before you reach for the Advil,
Mhm.
maybe try to think that through and say, maybe I should foam roll my quads a little bit, stretch them out, do a prolonged stretch, put some ice on there, and then see how it feels,
Mhm.
rather than just, oh yeah, I play pickleball or tennis, my
Mhm.
knee swells up, I take Advil, and it's better again. And then we're just in that roller coaster.
Yeah.
But eventually that won't work.
Yep.
You'll get to a certain point, and then you'll hit a barrier with that.
Yeah.
And it won't work.